Okay. All right. So did you guys get a chance to practice this one bundle? Any questions that you have?
I didn't get a chance to do that, Dixon.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. So just practice it once you get some time, and let me know if you have any questions. So any questions so far? Any other thing apart from bundle, or any other questions you have from the past topics?
No, at this point, only thing I wanted to check is, are we also going to cover the FHIR architecture? I don't recollect we talking about that. Just wanted to check.
FHIR architecture from, I mean, which perspective? What do you mean by?
Architecture in general, to understand. Like, where do we set up the servers, source, destination? How does whole data flow and all?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We will be discussing that.
Okay.
We are going to take a look at. So basically, if you want to uh, narrow down and say what are the various types of implementations that we can perform, mainly we can do it in three different ways. Okay, so we are going to discuss that. One of them is to um, convert V2 to FHIR resources. That is one architectural implementation. Another one is creating a FHIR facade server. Another one is creating basic FHIR server altogether from scratch. So these are the three categories that can be implemented using FHIR. Okay, so we will be discussing about these architectures down the line. First, we'll start with V2 to FHIR, and then next we'll jump on to other things to discuss on a high level. Because FHIR facade server or FHIR server, basic server altogether, those include uh, a lot of technical details which needs to be gone through programming and implementation server and all. But we will discuss the functional workflows around them for sure.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Yeah.
Jason, just a question.
Yeah.
In bindings, if it is required, then it is whatever there in the table, we have to use that. But in the extension, uh, then we have to, if you are extensible, if you are not satisfied with what is there in the table, we can add.
Right. Correct.
Yeah. That how we are going to add those, what are the requirements in the table?
Whenever it is extensible, how you are going to add. So that is the same way how you go ahead and add for extensions. We did not talk about extensions yet.
Okay.
So once we talk about extensions, you will get an idea.
Okay.
Okay.
Just thinking.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was looking at this and oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So when we add extensions in the same way, even for extensible, we can add new values. So we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Concept remains same either for basic resource structure or for uh, the extensible map that we have. You just add extensions. So once we look at extensions, just remind me there also we'll take a look at an example for that.
Okay.
Okay, so let us go ahead and get started with yesterday's scenario where we were talking about conditional put or conditional update basically. So what exactly we want to do here is yesterday we saw how this particular bundle is going to resolve. First, it will resolve the patient resource because that is the one which has full URL, and you have given a temporary ID there, temporary patient ID, And then subsequently you have other resources as well within the same entry, and you want to reference it back to the same patient that has been created. So the way the FHIR works is we have the temporary IDs placed in all the resources if there are more than if there is more than one resource. And apparently once you provide all of them, first it will create this and it will go ahead and pick up this ID and replace references in all the subsequent resources wherever that UR and UUID, same UUID is provided, right? So next is we may have a scenario that the patient might be already present in the destination server. So yesterday Krishna was asking the same question. How do we, I mean, um, how do we go ahead and check whether the patient is present in the destination server or not? Instead of creating, we have to go ahead and update it, or yeah, just go ahead and update the existing resource and then add that reference to rest of the resources that were present as part of the bundle, right? So let us go ahead and see how that can be done. So that can be done basically by changing the method. But how do we look up for patient record? How do we ensure that this particular transaction is looking up for that particular patient record? So you set the method to put because we just want to update that particular record. And then once you provide those details, next we have to provide what should be the lookup value, right? So you can go ahead and give that the same way, the way you have given, the way you generally look up for a patient record with using the get request. What do we do in get request? If we go back, so if you look at here, whenever we want to get certain data, you either provide the ID altogether, right? Right now, we cannot go ahead and provide the ID because we don't have the ID at all. We don't know what is the ID of that particular record. That's the whole purpose of doing a conditional put, right? Just give me 1 minute, guys. Sorry, guys. There's some issue going on. Let's go ahead and continue. So whenever we look at that particular patient record, we'll see that we can go ahead and perform either lookup through ID, which is the generic logical ID, looking up the logical ID and pulling out that particular patient record. But right now we don't have that, right? So the other way is to go ahead and search for the patient record using other searching parameters, like using name, using gender values, or something that is unique. You have to make sure that you are using a value which is unique for one particular record. If that is not unique, then it will shoot up an error. It will fail the entire transaction. Okay. So you have to always make sure that you are providing a unique lookup value. So for now, we'll go ahead and see. Um, we'll just give, first we'll create this particular record using a unique patient record because I have created multiple records using given name, which is called as Dixon. So what I'll do, I'll just add something unique so that it can create a unique value. Okay. let's post that bundle. All right, we have both the records created. Now, next we will go ahead and do a conditional put. And within this conditional put, we'll use lookup for name. Okay, because usually for patient, we don't have other unique values, right? Apart from having MRN number or business identifier. If you know business identifier, then you can use identifier. Right now, we haven't given any business identifier here. We just created the patient record, which added the logical ID. But if you have an MRN number or a patient identifier that has been provided as part of identifier element, then you can use that identifier as well. Basically, any search parameter value is okay. Okay, so let's give the name. So name is the search parameter, and let's give it as this name itself. Sorry. So what it will do is it will first go to patient resource and look up for the value, whether this value is present within the system or not. If it is present, it will go ahead and do a update to that particular record. If it is not present, then it will go ahead and create that particular record. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So it's taking time. See, reason being it is searching for that particular records. So now you can see that for patient record, it says 200 okay, which means it has updated. It did not create it. But for the as for the allergy resource, it created the new allergy resource because this is for the existing record. We did not ask to do a put for allergy, right? We have asked to go ahead and perform a post, so it has posted new allergy for this particular patient record. Okay, so what happens if we go ahead and provide a different ID? Let us go ahead and try that. So it says invalid conditional URL. The given resource is not matched by this URL. So there was no record found. So the entire bundle will fail. Okay, it will not post anything, neither the patient resource nor the other resources, because the lookup failed altogether.
And Dixon, if we want to, search based on multiple parameters, we append to the same URL.
Yes, you can just provide and then provide rest of the parameters.
Okay.
Okay. So that is how you go ahead and use a bundle. And this is very handy, very helpful because especially patient record, we may have identifier, but even if you don't have identifier, other resources like organizations, practitioners, and then ICD observations. All of these things will have one or the other unique value like ICD codes or NPIs or organization identifiers, OIDs present. So whenever we have such kind of things, we really will have that opportunity to go ahead and do a put to make sure duplication is not happening. Okay, so that is how it will be helpful.
So when we actually implement, I believe most of these bundles and use cases are there in some of the implementation guides, right? Like there are a lot of work groups I see based on, the specific specialities and use cases. They have set up a lot of implementation guides. So can
Yes.
those be reused instead of doing everything from scratch? Like for example, say, a care plan.
Right.
Something I want to,
Mm-hmm.
implement. So
Yes.
care plan could be a bundle, right? It cannot go independently. It has to have the
Oh,
patient and other resources.
it depends on how you are designing your implementation. Not required to be a bundle, but if you have a bundle implementation guide already, then you can use it. For example, the other day, I pulled out caring for BB patient uh, structure definition, right? So that is a profile which is used by most of the payer related companies. Okay. So you can borrow and you can use publicly published structure definitions or implementation guides. Not a problem in that.
Okay.
Okay, because they publish it so that others also can go ahead and use it.
Right.
Right. So next is we'll take a look at types of bundles that we have so that you can have a little idea. We'll just go through definitions to understand what those bundles can do. So let's look up for our bundle. All right. So there are various types of bundles. Now, in a bundle of transaction type transaction, the bundle is a transaction, and whenever you are sending a transaction, it will go ahead and process that transaction. And if one of the resource is failing, the entire bundles will fail. Whatever resource transactions are present, everything will fail. Nothing will be created or nothing will be updated. Okay, that is the nature of a transaction type bundle. But what if you want to go ahead and create individual resources independent of our actual transaction or independent of other resources? Then you, in that situation, you go ahead and use a batch. Okay, in batch type of transaction, you have to go ahead and you can go ahead and create individual resources. Even if one of the resource is failing, then it will go ahead and create other resources. In what scenarios we do use it? um, when we want to post 100 patient records altogether, okay, we can create a bundle. Each we can create a bundle, and within entry element you can have 100 resources, one resource representing each patient record, and then post it to the server. Okay, so in that scenario, we are not going ahead and creating a patient record altogether. Oh, sorry, we are not going ahead and denying creation of another patient record if one of the records is failing. Okay, so you will ensure that all the resources are created, and if something is failing, then you will get that response in the batch response. So batch response and transaction response are responses that you get back from the server whenever you are performing these types of these bundle posts, or when you send these types of bundles to the server. And message is nothing but the one where we use mainly for converting an HL7 message, HL7 V2 message to FHIR transaction. So in that particular bundle, always the first resource is the message header resource, so that the server understands that this is a um, HL7 V2 message getting converted to FHIR transaction. Okay, history is what we have seen for history. Search set is basically whenever you perform a search, then you will get the search result back in the form of a bundle, right? So these are the various types of bundles we have. You can go ahead and use any one of them as per your requirement based on the need whenever you are performing any of the transactions. The main things that you will see when you are sending a bundle to the server is to go ahead and work on either transaction or a batch. These are the two main things. In case of HL7 message conversions from V2 to FHIR, you will be using message. Okay. So any other questions? Any questions with respect to bundle before we jump on to next topic, which is to look at contained resources?
No.
All right. Any questions from you, Vishwa?
No,
Okay. All right.
bundle you can make any resource, as many resources as per the requirement of our requirement.
Yes. Yes. There is no restriction.
No restriction.
Yeah. There is no restriction that you can only go ahead and create 10, 15, 20. It's an array. So entry is an array, right? So there is no specific set number limitations there, unless your server is actually posting that. Let's say you have your FHIR implementation server where you are posting your bundle to. If that server has any limitation, that array cannot contain more than 100 objects, then you may have any issue. But from FHIR's perspective, they don't restrict anything. FHIR doesn't say that you can have so many resources only. If your server is enforcing it, then you have to follow what server says.
Oh,
All right. So next, let us take a look at another special type of resource, which kind of looks like bundle, but it has its own uniqueness, and it has its own um, purpose on why this particular type of resource has been designed and created within FHIR. Okay, which is nothing but contained resource. So a contained resource is nothing but um, a collection of resources which you add as part of the main resource object. Okay, and you will add all the list of resources that are that you are planning to go ahead and use as a reference within that particular resource. Okay, we'll take a look at an example, but first let us understand how did contained resource come here in a patient resource. If you go back to the patient resource and take a look at the structure, we are not seeing contained resource anywhere, contained element anywhere, right? But if you go back to, if you look at the patient's data type, it says domain resource. And when we pull out domain resource or its base resource, apparently the ancestors mention one of the ancestors is contained resource. Apart from extensions, modifier extensions, we have seen all of these things, right? When we go back to domain resource, we have one of the elements which says contained resource. Okay, so that is how you can go ahead and add contained resource to any resource which has the data type of domain resource, whether it is allergy uh, or episode of care or medication statement, whatever resource you are dealing with. Every resource, if it has the base type of domain resource, it will have the ancestor of contained resource for sure. So when you have contained resource, what is the main purpose of having it? Let's say you have an HL7 message, or you have some CSV data with you, and within that data you have patient record, and you also have a provider record, and you also have organization information. All right, but unfortunately there is no way for you to use a conditional put or conditional create, something like that, because you want to go ahead and uh, create the resource, but unfortunately you cannot go ahead and create it or do a conditional put. At the same time, you don't want to duplicate it in the destination server. Okay, so what can be done in that situation? You don't want to create a resource, but you neither have a proper lookup value, right? So at that point of time, you can go ahead and use contained resources. Contained resources say that the resources you are going to add to the base object, which is nothing but to the resource, will be part of the main resource itself, and you can post it to the server But the downside of creating a contained resources, you cannot go ahead and search for it individually. Contained resources will be part of the base object or part of the main resource object and will not have individual existence on the destination server. Okay, what do I mean by that? If you are creating a resource within that contained resource, for example, if you look at this resource which we have here, we are creating a patient resource altogether. As part of that data, we also have providers information. So we are creating a practitioner resource too. Okay, but we are creating a practitioner resource inside a contained element, which indicates that this resource contains within the main patient resource object. And you follow the same process of creating the entire resource for as the way you create for other resources. If you go look at the practitioner resource, this entire structure is for practitioner resource, and we have created that resource altogether. But this resource is part of the contained element. Okay, and when you post this particular contained resource to the server and create this patient resource, it will go ahead and create the patient resource, and it will not go ahead and create an individual existence or individual resource for this particular practitioner resource that you have here. This is like your normal text that is present within the patient resource. It will not have an individual existence. That is the main not downside, but the design is designed in such a way that this will not have individual existence. But if you want to see and figure out what all the other resources that are being referenced within the patient resource, then you can go ahead and just pull out the patient resource and see what all the resources that we have as part of contained element. And you reference it back this way. Whenever you have a contained resource within the system, then you will be providing the ID within the contained resource, and you will use it as a reference in the actual element. So we have general practitioner element in patient resource, right? So if you go back, we have the general practitioner. We have to reference it back either to organization or to practitioner or practitioner role. Here we have created a practitioner resource within the contained element, and we have given an ID to that as pract123. And the same ID will be referenced back with the help of hash. Whenever you use hash, it is pointing you back to the contained resource so that it would not fail on the destination server. Okay. So whenever you have, as I said in the beginning, whenever you have situations where you don't want to create or you cannot create for some or the other reason because you don't have unique identifiers and you don't have to duplicate the records on the destination side, then you follow the process of creating contained resources.
But when content resource, suppose we are in search of this practitioner, we can put the, could put the ID, it will also not search for that. That is what can.
I did not get your question. Your voice is muffling, Vishwa. Yesterday it was the same case.
Hello, no, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you can talk, I can let you know. Yeah, please go ahead and ask the question again. Sorry, I didn't get that.
Yes. In the practice, you have told it has no individual
Existence, yes.
Existence. So if you are going to search for this practice, how can we do that?
You won't get it.
We won't get it.
You won't get it. That's what I was saying. So apparently you won't.
In case of bundle, we can get that.
In case of bundle, we can get it. Yes, bundle is creating individual resources altogether. Here we are creating one patient resource and having other resources within contained element, which means the server will consider this as the resource. It won't consider rest of the contained elements as individual resources. It will consider that as individual text, some normal text present within the patient resource. Okay, this entire patient resource will be of one resource type, and it will save it in the database as one single object. It will not go ahead and even try to resolve these resources at all.
Yeah. In what scenario we can use this content resource?
So as I said, whenever you are in an ambiguous situation where you do not know what is a unique identifier using which you cannot do a conditional put or conditional post, and in scenarios where you don't want to end up creating duplicate records on the destination server because you don't have conditional post or conditional basically conditional create, you go ahead and use these kind of contained resources. Or
Okay.
you don't have unique identifiers in the source data that you are receiving,
Okay.
you go ahead and create these kind of resources.
Suppose in a bundle that we have just discussed, that if the server accept 100 resources, more than that we cannot go. In those cases, can you go with content resource?
Uh, that is not a proper use case. Having 100 resources only as a restriction is for the bundle. But if
Yeah.
you have that kind of scenario, then you have to create a second bundle with rest of the other resources, because you still want the individual existence of each resource to be there, right?
Yes.
Contained
Yes.
resources are done because in the situation that you and the question that you asked, can we go ahead and create a contained resource because we have restriction on the server which cannot create more than 100 resources in one single post bundle, right? uh, in that scenario, I would go ahead and create another bundle with next 100 resources, so because I want individual existence to be there. This scenario
Yes.
comes into play whether when you cannot have an individual existence for a resource, so that you can make that resource a subset of the main resource. Okay, because there is no scope of creating an individual resource here for one or the other reasons, like not having unique identifiers. Okay.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I was working on one of the implementations, which is to go ahead and create an episode of care, which is a claim related transaction. This is another use case, claim related transactions. And within those claim related transactions, we have these things coming up. We will have provider organization, we have provider information, and those are the two resources which we are about to create or update if they are present in the destination server, along with the other claim related details like line number, item number, and everything, and the claim header values and all of those things. The challenge that we entered there is we have unique uh, IDs, which are nothing but NPIs for each of the provider organizations, providers, and everyone. And when we were posting, uh, basically we are converting the entire normal database into a FHIR repository. That's the base project. So we were extracting data from database and then converting it to FHIR resources using JavaScript, and then posting it to the FHIR server. So before getting into claims, we completed allergies, we completed providers, we completed practitioners, everything is created. But by the point we entered claims, we ended up in having a challenge. We could not do a conditional put there for the reason that we have used NPA as a unique identifier, but that is not the first identifier within the identifier array that we had. We have used other identifiers as well. So there was probability of failing for the lookup that is about to create, lookup that is about to happen. So in that scenario, we were planning to go ahead and use contained resources only for episode of care, only for that claim related transactions, so that whoever is performing a lookup or whoever is performing a get for episode of care to see what all claims were released for a certain patient, um, they would still have the information on who is the provider, who, what is the organization, and all. But those providers and those organizations are part of contained resource and will not have individual existence on the destination FHIR server.
Dixon, one question.
Yeah.
FHIR would treat all the HL7, EDI, and any other format the same way, right? It doesn't bother because eventually we'll have to map and send it across. Is that how it treats them?
Yes, yes. I mean,
Okay.
for FHIR, it doesn't matter whether you are sending HL7 or, I mean, V2 or V3 or CDA or anything. Apparently, you will convert everything to in the form of a resource structure and then post it to the FHIR server.
Okay. Uh, Now the other question I have is, for example, if you take the same, episode of K, right, for the claim.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So if we are sending, these provider or other elements in the contained resource, wouldn't there be any data inconsistencies? Because I worked on EDI, so there are a lot of business rules that we put in place, right? When you process a claim, it goes through all that provider details, whether
Correct.
syntaxes and all. So where do we plug in all of these? Is it needed on the destination?
It would fail on provider or organization in the sense if it wants to validate that data.
Yes, because when we send the transaction, there needs to be data integrity also, right? So for example, if you have a
Correct.
claim, we have a billing provider, we have a servicing provider, okay, and those providers should be on the provider, a dictionary on the source.
Correct.
With some API
Correct.
tags, IDs and everything.
Exactly.
So if you are sending a claim out for say member ABC, and
Got
that
it.
member say billing provider that you have mentioned on the episode of Care is
Correct.
not the correct billing provider, or it's a provider but it's not set up as a billing provider, that may be a
Understood.
servicing provider in the system. So where do we put in all these business logic?
Okay, good question. So I understood your question now. So now I gave this a particular scenario where we were converting the data which was already where already claims were settled and claim data is present in the source database, and we just wanted to make them available as FHIR resources on the destination FHIR server. We are not going to generate a claim and send it to insurance company in the form of JSON objects.
Okay, so you're saying you're picking up claim which is already processed.
Exactly.
Went through adjudication.
Exactly.
Okay, understood. So
Yes.
it's a
Wherever.
plain data extract and sending over.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So that was the scenario that we were dealing with. In the case that you asked for, we will create individual providers and then send it to the destination server. It's destination server's headache of how they are going to validate through the entire JSON object. As we are going to send it as a reference, then they should bother on how do we do a lookup based on one of the NPI values, because every provider and every organization will have a unique identifier. Right. In the scenario that we said, we were using multiple identifiers because the source database had multiple identifiers for apart from NPI, and NPI was not the first identifier in the list of arrays that we had. So that was a challenge.
Okay.
Okay, because every resource have, I mean, most of the resources have identifier element, right? Like this one, and this is an array. So we had NPI as one of the arrays, but the NPI that we created may be the first object, second object, or third object. And the server that we were dealing with, I just don't want to mention the name, but the FHIR server that we were dealing with, it will look up only for the first object. So by that time, we already created practitioner resources, we already created organization resources, and NPI might be any one of the identifier object. So the lookup would fail in few situations, right? So if the lookup fails, then it will go ahead and create a new resource. Not that it will not create, it will create a new resource, and we will end up in having duplicates for same practitioner.
Okay, yeah, understood.
Right. So we thought only for episode of care, because it's just a representational data, where we have to represent the data and we don't want to go ahead and have the need of creating another resources was not there. We went with content resource because someone is looking up for claim to see just what has been, who is the provider, who is the organization, and what has been sent and what has been adjusted or settled. Okay. So any other questions regarding content resources? All right. So we will conclude today's session here. We'll continue tomorrow with other topics that we have. Actually, I should attend some call just for 10 minutes. I will go ahead and attend that for office. So just excuse me for today. We'll continue from tomorrow. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much. You both have a good day. We'll catch up tomorrow morning.